My aunt shoved me off the porch onto the gravel at our family reunion, cackling that I was faking it for drama. The whole family roared with laughter until an unmarked SUV pulled up. An agent stepped out and said, "Congratulations, you all just laughed your way into a felony charge." The gravel was the first thing I felt. Not the pain, not yet, just hundreds of small stones pressing into my cheek while my right hand jerked against my will, over and over, like a marionette with its strings yanked by somebody standing very far away. I could hear Biscuit barking from inside the lodge. I could hear my cousin's phone make that fake shutter click sound twice. And I could hear over all of it 41 members of my family laughing so hard that someone, I never found out who, actually clapped. I want to tell you it was the first time this had happened in front of them. It wasn't. It was just the first time anyone had caught the moment right before it. My Aunt Colleen's hand flat against my shoulder blade, the small, deliberate push that sent me off the top porch step and into the gravel turnaround where the cars park. Everyone assumed I'd tripped. Colleen made sure of that, laughing loud enough to cue the room, calling out that I was performing again before I'd even hit the ground. None of that would be the part of the day anyone remembered by dinner time. Because 40 minutes later, while 3 of my cousins were still crowded around a phone screen trying to get the video to load so they could watch it again, a black SUV with government plates came up the gravel drive nobody outside the family ever used, and it changed what kind of day this actually was for all of us in ways nobody standing on that porch could have guessed. I'm Naomi Voss. I'm 31, and I've been a physical therapist for 6 years, which is a detail that matters later, so hold on to it. I've also had functional neurological disorder for a decade, a condition where my brain and my nervous system stop talking to each other correctly under stress, so I fall, or my hand jerks, or my speech stalls out mid-sentence. And none of it is something I'm choosing, and none of it shows up on a normal MRI. It took doctors 4 years, and 2, it's probably just anxiety, sweetie dismissals to even give it a name. I spent those 4 years being told by professionals that I might be making it up. I did not spend the following 6 years expecting my own family to say the same thing, but here we were. I'd spent 6 years on the other side of exactly this kind of disbelief, working as a physical therapist in a neuro rehab clinic outside Columbus, watching stroke patients and accident survivors get waved off by insurance reviewers who'd never once watched a real episode happen in real time. I knew the paperwork. I knew the specific, maddening slowness of getting a condition without a clean lab test taken seriously by anyone who had power over your life. I did not know, walking up the porch steps that afternoon, that the same skill set was about to matter for reasons that had nothing to do with a clinic. Our family had held this reunion at the same lakeside lodge for 30 years, 3 days every July at a place called Ember Point, tucked inside Talcott Ridge National Forest, on a lease my grandfather Walter Calder had secured back when he was still a working ranger with the Forest Service. He died when I was 19, and the reunion kept happening at his lodge every year like a tribute. Nobody said out loud was a tribute. There was a chipped enamel coffee pot that had been there since before I was born. There was a screen door that stuck in humid weather. There was a folding table someone always forgot to wipe down, so it left a faint jam-colored ring on whatever tablecloth got laid over it. My Aunt Colleen ran point on all of it now. The food, the seating chart, the little printed schedule of fun family activities, the same way she ran the Calder Family Legacy Fund, the addiction support charity she'd started in my grandfather's name 11 years ago and had never once let anyone forget she started. My brother Julian was the one who'd actually taught me how to ask for help without apologizing for needing it, which sounds like a small thing until you've spent 4 years being told a specialist bill was for something psychological, basically. He drove 9 hours from Ohio every July with his dog, Biscuit, folded into the back seat of a Subaru that always smelled faintly of last year's citronella candle. My mother kept a running grocery list taped to the lodge's ancient refrigerator. Sunscreen, hot dog buns, the good coffee, always in her handwriting no matter who actually did the shopping. And there was a comfort in that continuity I hadn't examined much until it started to matter. 30 years at the same lodge meant 30 years of assuming the people inside it were safe by default, which turns out to be its own quiet, dangerous habit. Colleen had been telling a version of me for 3 years that made me easier to laugh at than to worry about. It usually came out light. There she goes again. Somebody get the cameras. She does this when she wants attention. Dropped into conversation with just enough warmth that anyone objecting looked like the humorless one. I used to think it was thoughtlessness. By that July, watching my hand still jerking against the gravel while my Uncle Dennis filmed it sideways for the group chat, I understood it had hardened into something closer to conviction. Colleen didn't think she was lying anymore. That's a different, worse thing than lying, and it would take federal paperwork before I understood why. The first strange detail was small enough that nobody noticed it as strange at all. My brother Julian, kneeling next to me on the gravel trying to get me to focus on his voice the way I'd taught him to, had already called 911 before Colleen could talk him out of it. What came up the drive 11 minutes later wasn't the county cruiser we all expected. It was a white pickup with a green Forest Service shield on the door, and behind it, that black SUV. I told myself it was a mix-up. Wrong dispatch, wrong address, some kind of jurisdiction mistake that would sort itself out in 5 minutes and let everyone go back to pretending nothing had happened. Julian thought the same thing. He actually laughed, a short, confused laugh, and said, "I think they sent the wrong guys." The Forest Service truck's driver, a woman with a name tag reading D. Emery, stepped out first, looked at the porch, looked at the gravel, looked at at me and said something into her shoulder radio that made the second vehicle's door open before she'd even finished the sentence. My Uncle Dennis found his footing before anyone else did and walked straight toward the vehicles, already talking before either door had fully opened. This was a private family thing. A little stumble on the porch steps, surely they could just note it down as an accident and let everyone get back to lunch. Whoever he was talking to didn't answer him. Nobody answered him. That silence should have told him something, but it didn't. Not yet. My stomach dropped before I understood why. Colleen's face didn't. She smoothed her sundress, put on the hostess voice she used for skeptical in-laws, and walked straight toward Deputy Emery with her hand already extended, already explaining that this was a family matter, a silly little accident, nothing that needed. And Deputy Emery cut her off without raising her voice at all. Ma'am, I need everyone to stay where they are for a minute. This address falls inside special use permit land. That changes who handles this. Nobody in my family had ever heard the word permit mean anything except the one that let us park by the lake. My Uncle Dennis actually said out loud, "What does that have to do with anything?" And I remember thinking the same thing, lying in the gravel with my hand finally starting to still, my cheek stinging, thinking, what does that have to do with anything? We found out inside the next hour, and the answer would not stay a small answer for very long. The man who got out of the SUV introduced himself as U.S. Forest Service Special Agent Odalis Ferreira, 11 years with the agency's Law Enforcement and Investigations Division, and the first thing he did, before he asked a single question about what had happened, was walk the porch and the gravel turnaround like he was reading a map only he could see. Then he asked, calmly, whether anyone had been filming. 6 phones went up out of pockets at once, which should have told everyone something about how normal filming each other had become in this family. Colleen's smile held for exactly as long as it took my cousin Priya, the one who'd been holding the phone that got the clearest angle, to remember, too late, that her video was already backed up automatically to a shared family cloud folder from 3 summers ago that nobody had ever turned off. I watched her face go through the whole arc, the reach for her phone, the beginning of, let me just delete this real quick, and then the flat understanding that it didn't matter anymore, because Agent Ferreira had already asked, politely, formally, for phones to stay exactly where they were. I want to be honest about what I felt watching that video played back on Agent Ferreira's own tablet 20 minutes later, in the shade of the lodge's side porch, with my mother's hand gripping mine hard enough to hurt. Some small, tired part of me had spent years half-believing Colleen's version, that maybe I dramatized things, that maybe my body chose the worst possible moments on purpose, the way she always implied. I'm a clinician. I know exactly what a genuine drop attack looks like from a training standpoint. The asymmetric muscle response, the delayed startle, the specific quality of the tremor, because I've watched patients go through it 100 times from the other side of the room. Watching myself on that small screen, I recognized my own condition the way I'd recognize any patient's. It wasn't performance. It had never been performance. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I watched it a second time, not from fear this time, but from something closer to 10 years of quiet vindication landing all at once, in the worst possible circumstances, in front of 41 people who had already started arguing about whose fault this was. Agent Ferreira paused the video on the frame right before the fall, Colleen's hand flat and deliberate against my shoulder blade, and said the sentence that actually made the porch go silent for the first time all day. This property sits under special use permit number 6114R, issued to this family in 1994. That means, legally, we're not standing on private land right now. We're standing on federal land. Any assault that happens here doesn't go to the county. It comes to us. He let that sit for a second before he added, "Ma'am," looking directly at Colleen now, "based on the footage, and given the visible injury, we're documenting this as a potential felony assault under federal statute. That's not a county charge you can talk your way out of over dinner. That's mine to investigate, and it's the U.S. Attorney's Office that decides what happens next." My Uncle Dennis went pale enough that his wife made him sit down. Colleen laughed, that same laugh from the porch, thinner now, missing its audience, and said it had obviously been a joke that went wrong, that I'd exaggerated it the way I exaggerated everything, that surely a shove between family didn't count the same as a real assault. Agent Ferreira didn't argue with her. He didn't need to. He just tapped the tablet screen, replaying the 11 seconds of video where her hand made contact, and her voice, clear as anything on the audio, called out that I was faking it for drama while I was already falling. My cousin's husband, a real estate lawyer who had never once volunteered legal opinions at a family gathering before that afternoon, got pulled into a side conversation near the woodpile and came back looking like he wished he hadn't answered his phone. I found out later he'd told Colleen, quietly, that federal assault charges on documented land weren't the kind of thing a family apology made disappear, that this was now a matter for prosecutors, not for people who loved each other trying to smooth it over by Sunday. Agent Ferreira walked me through the mechanics of it plainly, the way I imagine he'd explained it to 100 confused families before mine. The video and the photos taken of my arm and cheek that afternoon went into evidence under a formal chain of custody, logged, sealed, time-stamped, so nothing about them could later be disputed as altered or selectively edited. He said his office had briefly discussed requesting an emergency no-contact order between Colleen and me while the investigation was open, but that I'd declined it, mostly because Colleen wasn't going to be within 400 miles of me before the next reunion anyway, and I didn't want the case to become about restrictions instead of about what had actually happened happened. No bail was set because no arrest was made that day, just a summons, mailed 3 weeks later to the house Colleen had lived in for 22 years, informing her of the date she'd need to appear. For the next 2 days, while Agent Ferreira's office processed statements and pulled the video into evidence, I watched my extended family do something I hadn't expected, which was start quietly rewriting what they'd seen. My cousin Priya texted me first, gentle and apologetic, saying maybe I'd startled Colleen by stepping backward. Maybe it wasn't really a shove so much as a she trailed off there, didn't finish the sentence, but I understood what she meant. 2 more relatives sent almost identical messages within the hour. Careful, hedged, clearly coordinated in a group chat I wasn't part of. My own stomach kept dropping every time my phone buzzed. I sat on my mother's back deck reading them and thought, not for the first time in 10 years, that being disbelieved by strangers had never hurt the way being disbelieved by family did. I called Colleen directly on the second night, mostly because some stubborn, hopeful part of me still believed that hearing my actual voice might do what the video hadn't. She picked up on the 4th ring, and for a second I thought she might really talk to me. Instead, she said, almost gently, that she hoped I understood how this was going to look to people. A grown woman pressing federal charges over a little push, turning a family weekend into something that would follow all of us around for years. She said it like she was doing me a favor by warning me. I asked her, as calmly as I could manage, why she'd called out that I was faking it before I'd even hit the ground, if it had really just been a little push and nothing more. She didn't have an answer for that. She said she had to go start dinner and hung up before I could ask again. What none of them accounted for was the timestamp. Priya's video had synced to the cloud folder the instant it was recorded. 4:12 p.m. Verified, unedited, filed by Agent Ferreira's office as Exhibit A, before anyone had a chance to quietly delete or reframe anything. When 2 cousins tried to walk back their statements to investigators 3 days later, their new version didn't match a video that had already been locked into evidence with a federal timestamp on it. That contradiction, more than anything anyone said, was what kept the case moving instead of dissolving into a family shrug the way I think everyone but me expected it to. It was my mother, of all people, who cracked the case open into something none of us had been looking for, and she did it almost accidentally, the way the worst truths in families usually come out. We were on her porch on the 3rd night, both of us worn thin, and she was talking about how Colleen used to be different before she got so brittle about it, and she said offhand, staring at her coffee instead of at me, I think it really started right after the accident. You were never quite the same after that trip. I asked her which accident. I genuinely didn't know which one she meant. There'd been a fender bender on a family ski trip when I was 21, small enough that I'd mostly forgotten it, the kind of thing you mention once and never again. My mother went quiet in a way that told me the silence itself was the answer. The one on the pass, she finally said. Colleen was driving. You hit your head on the window. You were dizzy for weeks after. Nobody ever connected it to anything because you seemed fine. I hadn't seemed fine. I'd seemed fine to them. My first unexplained fall happened 4 months after that trip. My first doctor's dismissal came 6 months after that. 10 years of being told my body was inventing something out of nothing, and the answer might have been sitting in a decade-old accident report the whole time, in a filing cabinet nobody in my family had ever wanted to open again. I sat with that for 2 full days before I did anything about it, running the timeline the way I'd run through a patient's chart looking for the thing everyone else had missed. Dizzy for weeks. A family that quietly agreed never to revisit an old accident report. A first unexplained fall 4 months later. My hands kept finding reasons to shake at odd moments that week, reaching for a coffee mug, signing a delivery slip, and I recognized that too, clinically, as stress-amplifying baseline symptoms, which didn't make it any easier to sit through. I requested that report myself, using the same records access training I use at work when I need a patient's imaging history released. It took 4 days and a form filed through the county clerk. When it came back, it was 2 pages, plain and clinical, filed by a Corporal Owen Bratcher a decade earlier. A single vehicle collision on Route 9, driver at fault for distracted driving, minor injuries reported to both occupants, no citation issued at the driver's request after the family declined to pursue further action. The driver listed was Colleen. My hands were shaking again reading it, but not the way they shook during an episode. This was a different kind of shaking, the kind that comes from finally holding proof of something you'd started to believe you'd imagined. I brought the report to Agent Ferreira, not because I thought it would change the assault charge. A shove was still a shove, and he told me plainly that the felony question stood on its own, regardless of what I'd found, but because I needed someone with authority to look at it and tell me I wasn't reaching. He read both pages twice. Then he asked me something I hadn't expected, whether I'd be willing to let my treating neurologist release my diagnostic history as part of the file. He wasn't building a case about the accident. He was trying to understand professionally why a woman who'd spent a decade mocking a medical condition might have a reason of her own for needing it not to be real. My neurologist, Dr. Priyanka Suresh, 14 years specializing in functional neurological disorders, the woman who'd finally given my condition a name after 2 other doctors gave me a shrug, wrote a 2-page summary at the agent's request. It laid out, in plain clinical language, that FND onset is frequently triggered by physical trauma, that a head injury in a motor vehicle collision is a textbook precipitating event, and that the presentation visible in the Porch video, the asymmetric tremor, the delayed collapse, the brief post-episode disorientation, was entirely consistent with a a genuine neurological event and inconsistent with voluntary performance. It wasn't proof of what Colleen knew. It was proof of what Colleen could have known for 10 years if she'd ever once let herself look. Assistant U.S. Attorney Desmond Okafor picked up the case 8 days after the reunion. 9 years with the office, mostly public corruption work before this, which he told me himself made him unusually patient with paper trails. He laid out the situation for me plainly on a call I took standing in my kitchen, one hand braced on the counter because I already knew I wasn't going to like the choice he was about to give me. The video alone was enough to charge Colleen with federal assault. That much was settled. What wasn't settled was whether his office would push for a plea that resolved quickly and quietly. Colleen accepting a federal misdemeanor, a fine, no formal admission beyond what the video already showed, or whether I wanted to request that the accident report and the medical history be formally raised in her interview, on the record, which could drag the process out for weeks and offered no guarantee she'd say anything at all beyond a lawyer's careful denial. I had until the following afternoon to decide. 24 hours to choose between a fast, sure conviction and a slower, uncertain shot at hearing her actually say she'd known. Colleen's husband called me twice that evening, and I let both go to voicemail before finally listening to them back to back at midnight. He wasn't unkind. He sounded tired in a way that made it hard to be angry at him specifically, and he said most of the family would understand if I just let the misdemeanor stand and let it be over, that dragging a decade-old driving record into a federal file wouldn't undo anything. It would just make sure nobody could look anybody else in the eye at the next holiday. He wasn't wrong about the cost. He just wasn't the one who'd spent 10 years being told the cost of speaking up was smaller than the cost of staying quiet, when in my experience it had always been the other way around. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about 10 years of "she's performing," said in front of people who loved me, said often enough that some of them had started to believe it a little themselves. I kept thinking about how easy it would be to take the fast version and let the fine and the paperwork stand in for an apology that might never come anyway. My throat was tight through most of that night, and at some point around 3 in the morning, I realized I wasn't deciding whether I wanted justice. I already had that, on video, time-stamped, and unarguable. I was deciding whether I could survive not getting the other thing too, the thing no plea deal could guarantee, the thing I actually wanted, which was for someone in my family to say out loud that they'd known and let me believe I was making it up anyway. I told Agent Okafor I wanted the full interview. It happened 6 days later, in a conference room at the federal building 2 counties over, Colleen across the table from Agent Ferreira and Agent Okafor with her lawyer beside her, and me watching from behind a one-way glass wall I hadn't expected to be allowed near, at Okafor's discretion, because he said the accuracy of an answer sometimes depends on who the person believes is listening. For the first 20 minutes, Colleen gave the answer her lawyer had clearly prepared her for, a joke gone wrong, exaggerated by a family member with a documented history of dramatic behavior, a shove she barely remembered as a shove at all. Agent Ferreira let her finish. Then he set the accident report on the table between them, face up, and asked her to read the driver line out loud. She didn't read it out loud. She looked at it for a long time instead, long enough that her lawyer leaned in and murmured something about pausing the interview. Colleen shook her head at him just once and kept looking at the page. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost the hostess register completely. "I know whose name is on that," she said. "I've known for 10 years. Nobody in the room said anything for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then she kept going, quieter, the words coming out like something that had been under pressure for a decade and had finally found the one crack it could get through. She said she'd told herself for years that Naomi's condition couldn't possibly be connected to a fender bender on an icy pass, that plenty of people hit their heads and were fine, that believing otherwise would have meant believing she'd caused this, not just an inconvenience, a decade of it. Watching a niece she loved get dismissed by doctors and then dismissed by her own family, partly because of things Colleen herself had said. Every time I performed, as she'd been calling it, some part of her had needed it to be performance, because the alternative was unbearable. Mocking me hadn't started as cruelty. It had started, she said, as the only way she knew how to keep from drowning in what she'd have to feel if she ever let herself believe me. Agent Okafor stepped out of the room for maybe 90 seconds afterward, ostensibly for water, though I think now it was to give me a moment alone with what I'd just heard. Priya was in the hallway too. She'd been called in that same day to give a supplemental statement about the video, and when she saw my face, she didn't ask what had happened. She just said, quietly, that she was sorry for the text she'd sent that first week, the one hinting I might have startled Colleen into it. She said she'd known, even while she was typing it, that it wasn't true, and had sent it anyway because that was easier than being the only cousin who didn't. I didn't have it in me to forgive her on the spot. I told her I appreciated her saying it, and I meant that much, at least. The federal charge proceeded regardless of what she said in that room. Agent Okafor had told me plainly it would, and it did. Colleen was formally charged with federal misdemeanor assault 3 weeks later, pled to it rather than risk trial, paid a fine, and was ordered to complete a supervised community service term. She stepped down from running the Calder Family Legacy Fund the same month before anyone on the board asked her to, and told my mother she didn't feel right holding a position built on my grandfather's name while an assault charge with her own on it was still working through federal court. It should have ended there, clean and complete, but it didn't, not quite, because 2 weeks Weeks after Colleen stepped down, the fund's new treasurer called an emergency meeting after finding that Colleen had, 8 years earlier, quietly and anonymously covered $14,300 in my out-of-pocket neurology testing costs through a side account nobody had known she controlled, back when my diagnosis was still uncertain and my insurance kept denying the imaging my doctors wanted. She'd never told me. She'd never told anyone. The same woman who'd spent a decade needing my condition not to be real had, at some point in the middle of that decade, quietly paid to help prove that it was, and then gone right back to calling it performance the next time we were all in the same room together. I don't have a tidy way to feel about that. I don't think I'm supposed to. Colleen completed her 100 hours of community service at a county recycling center 2 towns from her house, sorting glass and aluminum every Saturday morning for 4 months. A strange, almost mundane image to sit with. After spending a decade thinking of her as untouchable, my mother saw her there once by accident buying mulch at the garden center next door and said Colleen looked smaller than she remembered, though she couldn't say exactly what she meant by that. The next reunion was Colleen's idea to move. She suggested it herself. In a group text nobody argued with, a lodge 2 states over with no history attached to any of us. No gravel turnaround, no porch. Nobody called it exile. Everybody understood it as one anyway. I went back to Ember Point once more before the lease lapsed, alone, in October, when the lake was too cold for anyone to want to swim in it, and the porch was just a porch again. I stood at the top of the steps for a long time, looking down at the gravel, and I thought about how long I'd spent needing my own family to believe something a stranger with a badge and a permit number ended up proving faster than 10 years of asking ever could. It wasn't the apology I wanted. It was the only proof I ever actually got. And standing there, I finally let myself believe that was going to have to be enough.